I think it's fair to say that this adaptation from Junji Ito's horror manga series Uzumaki has not gone down well with longtime fans of the work. What was it that went wrong? How is it that such an acclaimed story that is not only considered one of the best horror manga series, but one of the best mangas ever written, have such a tepid adaptation? It might never have been amazing, but it never even remotely lived up to its expectation. It wasn't terrible, it wasn't even bad, it was just disappointing. So I have not read the manga. I have just watched this 4-episode series from Netflix. What I watched was visually creative. I like that they didn't use any colour. They've made it look as though it's come straight out of the manga, maintaining an eerie atmosphere which intensifies the fear factor with a distinct flavour. But as each episode went by, I felt my engagement towards the story deteriorate. I couldn't really attach myself to anything that was happening. The only aspect I will remember is the visuals. Sometimes for good reason and sometimes for bad. The illustrations of characters being consumed by the supernatural entity that this town has been cursed on. Detailed imagery of people transforming into snails. A man fitting himself into a box like a spiral that causes all his limbs to break in the most hideous way. A woman so fearful of being possessed by the spiral. She tortures herself by cutting the skin of her fingertips because they resemble a spiral pattern. These images of people going absolutely insane is what I take away from the show. The story itself, the mystery of the spiral, is not so interesting. It's difficult to grasp why that is. The Uzumaki anime adaptation was eagerly anticipated by fans of Junji Ito's horror masterpiece, but what we got left many disappointed. For years, readers have hailed Uzumaki as one of the greatest works in horror manga, blending psychological tension with graphic and nightmarish imagery in a way that's difficult to translate to other mediums. The original manga tells a story of a quiet town cursed by an obsession with spirals, an inexplicable force that manifests in increasingly horrific ways, twisting both the landscape and the residents into grotesque versions of themselves. Junji Ito's meticulous illustration style and unique storytelling created a kind of horror that burrows into the mind, establishing Uzumaki as both visually and emotionally unforgettable. Ito's horror isn't rooted in cheap scares or typical ghost stories, but in existential dread and the idea of an unavoidable descent into madness. Inspired by Japanese folklore, H.P. Lovecraft's cosmic horror, and Kafkaesque absurdity, Ito crafts Uzumaki around the gradual, inevitable breakdown of reality. The narrative is both disturbing and philosophical, as it explores humanity's relationship with uncontrollable forces and the insignificance of human resilience against supernatural or cosmic phenomena. In Uzumaki, the spiral curse warps nature, structures, and people in the town, making every twist and turn feel like a step deeper into insanity. This premise, combined with Ito's elaborate line work and masterful pacing, pulls readers into a surreal yet palpably terrifying experience that few horror works achieve. Ito's artwork in Uzumaki is central to its impact, and this is part of what made the anime adaptation such an exciting prospect for fans. His illustrations are meticulous, portraying ordinary objects and landscapes in unnerving ways. Everything from a simple snail shell to a gust of wind is imbued with a dark fascination. Each panel in the manga is a testament to his ability to draw the viewer into a world where even the most mundane details carry a sinister implication. This visual style builds a world that is both hauntingly beautiful and horrific, where terror comes as much from what you see as from what you fear may come next. Given the immense respect Ito commands as an artist, the anime adaptation was expected to be a faithful tribute to his chilling world, a living representation of the manga's intricate detail and creeping horror. This expectation heightened when it was announced that the adaptation would use a unique, monochromatic animation style to mirror the black and white horror of Ito's pages. The first episode impressed many fans with its commitment to preserving the original aesthetic, which felt essential to the series' tone. The animation stayed close to Ito's line work, creating an experience that felt more like moving illustrations than typical anime. It was so detailed and creative. The sound design was incredible. It was crucial to make these scenes so creepy and effective. By omitting colour, the episode maintained the oppressive, somber atmosphere that Uzumaki fans cherished in the manga, focusing on shading, texture, and contrast to create a deeply unsettling world. The first episode felt incredibly faithful towards Ito's vision, and made the anime's release feel like a glimpse into a new genre of animated horror, one rooted as much in atmosphere as in visual fidelity. The pacing of the episode is quite impeccable. I was completely drawn into this world, a world in which people are driven to insanity by spirals. I mean, that shot of the girl's eyes sinking into her body which eventually disappears is so immersive and traumatizing. I could tell why this was such a well-loved story. It's unique, creative, and really disturbing, but you can't stop watching. Unfortunately, this excitement was short-lived, and I mean really short-lived. Everything good in the first episode is thrown out of the window and into a garbage chute. By the time the second episode aired, the anime's promise began to unravel. Fans were shocked by the drop in animation quality. Movements that should have conveyed terror or distress instead appeared stiff and awkward. The way they ran just looked like there was no effort into the animation. The once hypnotic eeriness felt hollow, weighed down by unnatural character movements and choppy animation that undercut the carefully crafted tension. The graceful eeriness of Ito's style, reliant on fluid, haunting imagery, was undermined by animation that felt as though it was working against itself, making the horror appear clunky and unintentionally stiff. Now, this show had been in development since 2019, and although I'm not entirely sure that this is the truth, but the impact of COVID-19 on the production caused severe disruption in regards to schedules and workflows, which likely forced the studio to compromise on animation quality. It's clear that budget constraints added to the challenges, which happens in many animation productions, and this left the adaptation in a difficult place where it is now impossible to live up to its initial ambitions. For fans, it was a frustrating realization that could have been an anime revolution in horror would instead be remembered for its limitations. The minimalist approach, which had initially seemed an artistic choice, became more of a liability. Rather than lending atmosphere, it highlighted the adaptation's inability to capture the richness and terror of Ito's world. The expressions of the main character, Kiri, was chalk and cheese from the first episode. I didn't even know it was her. I was thinking, is that the same person? Who is this? Who is this new character? But in terms of constraints, I feel like they just blew their entire budget on the first episode. I think rather than blaming it on COVID, I think this was a matter of poor management and organization. The third episode somehow gets worse. The imagination and creativity remained just as conceptually fascinating as the first, but the execution was not anywhere near as nail-biting. The fourth and final episode was definitely the more intriguing and an improvement in terms of story. Seeing how the entire town is now affected by the spiral, turning into this post-apocalyptic spiral temple of worship. It's literally turned into a spiral, but the animation and visuals were not quite as terrifying or effective. However, I was more engaged in the story, the reveal and the conclusion. Another criticism leveled at the anime was its omission of key scenes from the manga. This pared down adaptation gave viewers less time to sink into the story, eroding the manga's slow building sense of dread and diminishing the effectiveness of its terrifying climax. Scenes that had allowed Ito's characters to grow and viewers to immerse themselves in the spiraling horror were condensed or removed, creating an adaptation that felt rushed and underdeveloped. Fans familiar with the manga felt that each omitted scene was a missed opportunity to explore deeper facets of the story, the town's curse and the characters' psyches. Character development, particularly for the two protagonists Kiri and Shuichi, suffered as a result. In the manga, Kiri is a complex character, a mix of resilience, curiosity, and growing horror as she witnesses her friends and family being drawn into the spiral. Shuichi's tragic arc as he helplessly watches his parents succumb to madness and death adds emotional weight to the story. However, the anime failed to convey this depth. Kiri in particular felt like a hollow version of herself, lacking the personality and perspective that made her journey in the manga compelling. Her subdued reactions to the town's horrors made her appear passive, detracting from the emotional core of the story and making it harder for viewers to empathize with her plight. Shuichi too lost his tragic death, becoming a figure lacking in agency and impact. As a result, the anime lacked emotional depth, a fatal flaw in adapting a story that thrives on psychological horror and the unsettling decay of both body and mind. Ito's scenes of grotesque transformation, residents turning into snails, bodies twisted into impossible shapes, and minds breaking under the curse, are meant to disturb not only because of their horror but also because of what they signify, the loss of humanity, identity, and sanity. However, the adaptation's lack of character investment and emotional resonance left viewers detached, reducing these horrific scenes to visual spectacles rather than meaningful moments of dread. This reduced the series' impact to a series of eerie images without the underlying emotional anchor that makes horror truly resonant. However, the anime wasn't without its merits. One redeeming feature was its soundtrack, which successfully captured the ominous, oppressive tone of the story. The music added an aural layer to the horror, making each scene feel as though it were building towards something sinister, even as the other elements failed to deliver. This soundscape helped create an immersive atmosphere that resonated with fans and brought some of the manga's suspense to life. I just wish that the last 3 episodes lived up to the first. The promise that the first episode had given us truly fooled the fanbase, because you gave them hope. How many of Ito's adaptations have failed, and now you give the fans something with potential and is on course to being his first greatest adaptation, and then just takes a complete U-turn. In the end, the Uzumaki anime adaptation missed the potential for greatness it once promised. While it did capture a small glimpse of Ito's vision, it ultimately failed to live up to the psychological, visual, and emotional terror that defines the original manga. The adaptation leaves a lingering disappointment, a reminder of what Uzumaki could have been, a pioneering work in anime horror, and what it ultimately became, a well-intentioned but flawed attempt to animate the inanimate horrors of the spiral curse.